We're going to now go to Cathy Larkman, who is from Wales, and I'm going to add the spotlight. So Cathy is the coordinator of Women's Rights Network, a position she's held since the inception of this increasingly influential grassroots network of women. She is a former police superintendent, has championed issues affecting women and girls, and was a founder member of the South Wales Female Police Association, being named as one of the most influential female officers in the South Wales Police Breaking the Glass Ceiling event. Title for Cathy's talk today is the Gender Quotas Bill, Self-ID by the Back Door in Wales. Thank you so much, Cathy, and over to you.
It's just really important, really, that we get the message of what's happening in Wales across to as wide an audience as possible. We're a small nation, and a lot of what's been happening here, has gone below the radar, really. It's a really familiar story, I think, to everybody that I'm sort of going to relate now. I'll try and be economical with the time, obviously, because of, a lot of fantastic information that's gone on before this. But we're certainly really encouraged by the news from our sisters up in Scotland, really, and the fight that they've had there as well, and how inspirational that is down with us here in Wales, really. We've got a similar fight on at the moment. That familiar story is the Welsh Government trying to change the very definition of women and attack our sex-based rights. And they've been trying to do this recently on the back of what's called a Gender Quotas Bill. And the title of that has actually changed recently, and I'll sort of tell you the story of that. So we have a devolved government in Wales, for those of you who aren't familiar. I know there's a lot of my Welsh sisters in this talk in the audience today. And that government won't listen to the women of Wales. Unfortunately, they are so assured of their hold on power that they can afford to show complete contempt for 51% of the population. And despite seeing what's happened in Scotland, they've decided to progress self-ID in Wales. It's a small government who want to display their progressiveness, or what they call their progressiveness, and have been prone to capture by ideology, really, and a small group of special advisors and lobby groups influencing them. Another problem that we've had really sort of attached to that is drawing the attention of the rest of the UK and further afield to that, because our own Welsh media, until very recently, have looked the other way, really, and ignored this issue. And we've then had the challenge, really, of engaging national media on this as well, when there's so much else going on. So, Welsh women and Welsh women's groups have had to galvanise, organise, and try and disrupt the plans of Welsh Government, in an atmosphere where Welsh Government have, been employing the usual tricks, really, in terms of trying to shut us down and discredit us. So in terms of their sort of plans for self-ID, they've recently attempted to do this, or their first steps to doing this, via the back door, by way of a classic Denton strategy move, by tagging on the first steps of self-ID to other more popular legislation. So the legislation was a bill that purported to improve the representation of women in political life, which I've referred to as the Gender Quotas Bill, and in draft form originally was referred to by that name. But more lately, it's formally known as the Senedd Cymru Electoral Candidates Lists Bill. So we knew on the back of this, from conversations in the corridors of power, etc., that the intention of Welsh Government was to fully introduce self-ID in Wales sometime in 2026, perhaps backed then by a change of government who would, empower them to do it. But unfortunately for Welsh Government, there have been a number of obstacles to their plans. We've had a devolved administration here in Wales since 1999, when the National Assembly of Wales met for the first time, and Welsh Government sits at the seat of Welsh Government, which is the Senedd. It's important to state here, really, that Welsh Labour hold power in Wales and have done so since the inception of the administration in Wales. They're totally assured of their power base here. They're very comfortably in power. the last Senedd elections were in 2021, and re-elections in 26, by which time our First Minister, Mark Drakeford, will apparently have stepped down from political life too. But in the meantime, he's really busy ensuring he has a legacy to hand on. In terms of the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, there are 60 members of the Senedd, 40 of which serve constituencies and 20 are regional representatives, and 30 of those are from Welsh Labour. So that equals its best ever election result, but also means that they don't have an outright majority, and as a result have a cooperation agreement with the Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru, and they have a shared programme of work. Plaid Cymru are important in this because they share these same objectives and goals of Welsh Labour, unfortunately, and are aiding and abetting them in this sort of programme of work and the whole sort of self-ID thing. So one of the statements made by Welsh Government at the end of the published cooperation agreement was, and I'm just going to quote here, to make Wales the most LGBTQ plus friendly nation in Europe and support the publication of the LGBTQ plus action plan. And they also said that they intended to, quoting again, call for the powers to legislate to improve the lives and protect the safety of trans people in Wales to be devolved. So this has led to them introducing their LGBTQ plus plan for Wales. And it's not going to surprise anybody to know that, I think Merched Cymru, another Welsh women's organisation, actually did an audit of that plan in draft form and in final form. The LGBTQ plus plan hardly ever mentions the word lesbian. There's a few mentions of the word gay throughout it. There are, rafts of mentions of the T throughout this and the Q, etc. It's really what you sort of expect to see. But part of that LGBTQ plus plan is, various different things that Welsh Government want to see in place or have put in place. One of those is a relationship and sexuality code for schools, which is hugely influenced by queer theorists, and that's mandatory in Wales right now. So the Gender Quotas Bill was originally meant to form part of a wider Senedd reform bill, which would, amongst other things, increase the size of the Senedd from the current 60 members to 96 members. But there were concerns for a number of years, albeit Welsh Government will play these down and say that they were finely balanced, and they weren't finely balanced. But there were concerns that whether they had the legislative competence to do this, because equalities legislation is a reserved matter in the United Kingdom, as Scotland have found out recently. Well done, Scotland. And the worry that the whole Senedd reform package would fail if it was legally challenged. Therefore, they separated out the gender quotas part of this. And within Welsh Government, they've had a small team working full-time on that Gender Quotas Bill as well. So there's been a huge amount of officer time spent on this over the last few years, and a lot of sort of Welsh public money spent on this as well. So given the legal situation, you might be thinking, why on earth Welsh Government would press on regardless? Well, we know the conversations that are taking place is that they were banking on no one having either the will to challenge this legally, nor the financial resources at a time of increased financial demand to challenge that and take it all the way. That seems extraordinary to say so, but that was their thinking, and it's very much linked in with a small government surrounded by a small group of special advisors, influenced by a number of lobby groups who are absolutely certain of holding power and being very arrogant in that power base as well. It's not going to surprise any of you now if I mention the influence of Stonewall at this point and other organisations on Welsh Government. Our government are one of the major contributors in the UK to Stonewall. One of the the top, I think it's certainly one of the top 5 contributors to Stonewall sort of funds from external organisations. And you also have to bear in mind that any requests that women's groups have made to meet with Welsh Government ministers have been totally ignored or swerved. In 2022, I attended a publicly ticketed event at a constituency Labour Party meeting, and I went with Lisa Marie Taylor from Filia, where Lisa stood up and asked a question about trying to get Welsh Government to commit to meet with those concerned women's groups. And I recorded Lisa Marie at that meeting, so they couldn't deny that it had happened. Mark Drakeford, our First Minister, was there at that meeting, and his minister, Julie James, in front of Mark Drakeford, in front of everybody else, and recorded by myself, gave a public commitment that she would meet with those women's groups, we were all named, to reassure us and to have dialogue with us about our concerns about the direction of Welsh Government. Despite that, despite a raft of emails from all those organisations since, that hasn't happened. We've been totally ignored, and we've been, dismissed at every opportunity. And there's countless other examples of this. Loads of women's groups joined a meeting held by the Labour LGBTQ group, at which Hannah Blithin, one of the deputy ministers who's responsible for introducing the Gender Quotas Bill, was present. One by one, every single woman taking part in that meeting as she asked a relevant and courteous question in relation to the direction of Welsh Government and their consultation with concerned women's and LGB groups, was removed from that meeting for having the temerity to ask any question at all. Welsh Government only listened to women's groups who basically parrot the agreed line, and those women's groups, it won't surprise you to know, do receive funding from Welsh Government as well. So it's all sort of very, very much linked. Okay, so I've told you Plaid Cymru, the Nationalist Party, are fully on board with this as well. The position of Welsh Government, and they'll repeat it openly on the floors of the Senedd, is that trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary identities are valid. That mantra gets repeated several times, on the floor of the Senedd, and is quoted to us in written responses as well, and forms part of their LGBTQ+ plan. Hannah Blithin, the Deputy Minister for Social Partnerships, says, and I'm going to quote her again now so you just get a flavour of it, 40 years ago, gay and bisexual people were subject to hateful slurs and prejudice attacks. Trans people today are being subjected to a similar barrage of hate-fueled debates. We believe extending rights for one group does not mean eroding rights from another. We do not believe improving rights for trans women will damage rights for cisgender women and girls. Our trans communities are hurting, they're afraid, and they're experiencing harm. As a society, we can and must do better than this. So that's their position. So we had information from the Women's Rights Network, because I'm actually the Wales coordinator of the Women's Rights Network, but one of the early WRN coordinators overall. So we had information in early October, a Gender Quotas Bill was going to come out for publication, and the Women's Rights Network leaked that bill in late October. We made the decision just to go public with it and get it out there, really. Features of that bill included that a list of candidates for future elections must be at least 50% women, but included a definition of women that basically stated that it means any person who is proposing to undergo, is undergoing, or has undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning their sex to female by changing physiological or other attributes of sex. So you get the gist from that, really, that they were seeking a redefinition of women. The leaked draft also included the fact that Welsh Government were including within that an ability that they could amend the definition of woman at any time, and that no presiding officer in any electoral process could make any objection to anyone's declaration that they were in fact a woman. So a bill that was supposed to allegedly improve the representation of women in political life and ensure at least 50% of candidates on lists were women might end up with 100% of candidates on that list actually be a male, which is completely crazy, isn't it? So as I said, we leaked that. And some good news from this, in that we had great coverage across national media generally, and we broke through Welsh media as well, who had been largely silenced on this as well. Welsh government chose not to quote, other than to state they were still working on the bill. And interestingly, in the last few days, it was listed on the agenda for publication by Welsh government in a plenary meeting under its new name. But in a sort of unprecedented turn of events, prior to the journalists' briefing about that, it was cancelled from it. So that's led to sort of a lot of speculation as to what's actually happened. And we've found out possibly what actually happened. And I'll just come on to that now really shortly. I am conscious of the time. But I just wanted to tell you
Cathy, there's no problem with the time. There's no problem with the time, because we can carry on a little bit longer.
Okay,
so just
right.
yes, tell us everything, because it's fantastic what you're saying.
Okay. Okay. So as I said, this is unprecedented for a bill to go onto the agenda, but to be suddenly pulled at the last minute. And journalists did sit up and notice this and found it really, really unusual as well. When we actually leaked the bill, we had, there was a response in the media from lobby groups, and one of the trustees of Pride Cymru defended the right of what she referred to as trans women to stand for election as their authentic selves. And interestingly said, there has never been an openly transgender person elected to our national parliament, and it is a glass ceiling that needs smashing. Well, I don't know how anybody else feels about this, but I don't think there's any glass ceilings within political life that need smashing for men to be represented. So it just seemed an extraordinary statement, but it's totally in line really with the thinking of the individual and the organisation that put that forward. And Stonewall Cymru claimed not to have seen the draft bill, but were supportive of it, which would come as no surprise to anybody at all. And in fact said that they thought it was unfortunate and concerning that the bill was leaked and mischaracterised to further perpetuate a negative narrative against the trans community. So all these organisations within Wales are totally concerned with, the T and the Q. They're not concerned with the LGB at all. So why has the bill been pulled? I don't think it's been pulled indefinitely. I think this is a pause rather than a complete cessation, I have to say. And there's been different theories on why the bill has been pulled, but interestingly, there has been an article within a Welsh media outlet today which confirms our suspicions really, and claims to have had this information from a highly placed political source at Welsh Government. So the presiding officer of the Senedd is called the Llywedd, Elin Jones. Her party politics are the Welsh Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru. And the Llywedd is required on publication of a new bill to make a statement that she accepts that Welsh Government have the legislative competence to bring it in. Extraordinarily, really, for a bill that's been developed, and people have been working on it for a number of years, it doesn't look as though Welsh Government have actually perhaps had discussions with the Llywedd about whether she was going to in fact support that bill before they put it on the agenda. But her role is to protect the reputation of the Senedd. And the recent media report has made it clear that she has potentially listened to her own legal advisors and declined to announce that bill, and that's why that's been pulled from that agenda meeting. So the presiding officer, the Llywedd, does not feel that Welsh Government have the legal competence, allegedly, to bring this bill in, and as a result of which has refused to announce it, and that's what's caused it to be pulled. I also think that the enormous stink that's been created by Welsh women and the various groups sort of fighting both the Gender Quotas Bill and, you know, the full sort of self-ID picture that Welsh Government are going for, which include obviously the Women's Rights Network, plus, you know, our sister groups, Merched Cymru, Get the L Out, Outspoken Women, you know, the various resistors groups and LGBT Allies Cymru and Labour Women's Declaration, during which we made it really, really clear that those feelings that there wouldn't be a legal challenge, we negated those and made it very, very clear that we were ready to mount a legal challenge to that bill the moment they published it. So, you know, strong fighting talk, but with backup as well. And we think that enormous stink has possibly, we hope, meant that the presiding officer, the Llywedd, has really taken those legal responsibilities and that legislative competence issue very, very seriously. So if that hadn't happened before, you know, she has sat up and thought, I am possibly going to have to explain this issue in court and why I sort of, you know, allowed this bill to be published. So basically, you know, careers and political integrity then are probably on the line, aren't they, really? And, you know, thankfully, we hope somebody has taken that seriously. So that's the position at the moment with the Gender Quotas Bill. Will it be back? Unfortunately, I suspect it will be back. I think Welsh Government, if they don't work on it and reword it and bring it back soon and potentially work on the Llywedd and the legal advice, etc., then they may play a slightly longer game and wait for a change in UK government. And, you know, and if there's a change and there's a UK Labour government, they may bank on that government not wanting a confrontation with a very safe Welsh Labour government in place and approach UK Labour then for a devolution of equalities powers so that they don't end up in the courts in the same way or in the trouble in the same way that sort of Scottish government did. You know, that is a real possibility for what may happen and a real concern. So the influence of the UK political parties is really important for us here in Wales, really, in terms of the direction of travel this takes. You know, will UK Labour want a confrontation with Welsh Labour? You know, so it's important for us in terms moving forward, really, that we keep that spotlight on the Welsh Government, not just Labour in terms of the ruling party here, but Plaid Cymru as well, who have now had, you know, within the last few months, have had a new leader who we don't know what his position is, but his predecessor, Adam Price, was, you know, totally up to his neck, really, in gender ideology and completely supportive of it. So there's a lot of work going on to try and influence the other parties as well within Welsh Government and specifically Plaid Cymru. And definitely the national situation is hugely, hugely important of us. You know, it undoubtedly they're going to follow the lead of Scottish Government and try and sell this line as an attack on their own devolved powers and the authority of Wales, etc. We are already seeing that narrative played out sort of loud and clear. And in the meantime, it has to be said that for the last few years, you know, a soft version of self-ID has been operating in Wales, you know, and all those organisations that are linked to Welsh Government via, you know, funding in part are capitulating by changing internal policies and processes, really, you know, and operating a system of self-ID. There are no domestic violence services, rape crisis services in Wales that operate a sort of sex-based, a clear sex-based service. You know, when you dig into all their policies, they're all accepting sort of self-identification, which is really, really concerning. So we have huge amounts of battles here in Wales, but we have got some excellent women's groups, and the best thing for us really here is as much spotlight as possible, really, from everybody, you know, to ensure that this is forced out into the sunlight, really, and receives attention, because Welsh Government have been very much operating under the radar, and being arrogant and complacent that they can do this without any sort of scrutiny. So them being subjected to scrutiny on this has been really, really uncomfortable, and we need to keep that going. But in a nutshell, Welsh women and Welsh women's groups and LGBT groups are fighting this hard now, and we'll continue fighting it. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Where do we stand now, further to Scottish legal judgment this week confirming validity of Section 35 procedure taken by the UK government, which I think you sort of mentioned, but if you could answer that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Welsh Government are in a really sticky wicket in relation to that. And, we have been, we've been drawing their attention not only to that, but the sort of judgment in relation to the representation on public boards, stuff that happened in Scotland as well. They've just been ignoring it, really. They've been in, I can't say they've been in blissful ignorance. They've just been ignoring it. And the legislative situation in terms of devolution, Wales are on even more tricky ground than Scotland, really, in terms of doing this. I'm no constitutional expert by a long shot, so I won't, talk through the Government of Wales Act or anything like that. But suffice to say, Welsh Government are in even more tricky waters with regards to that. But the announcement yesterday, really, in terms of the Section 35 arrangements, etc., with Scotland, I would hope that that's landed really hard in Welsh Government. But who knows? And who knows? They've been very much characterised by a willingness to just ignore this and hope that they can just push it through under the radar. And I think they're banking as well on, UK Labour eventually not having the will to challenge them. It's just extraordinary, really, that it's happened. But if you bear in mind they've had clear legal advice that they didn't have there was high risk, they didn't have the legislative competence to do this anyway, and they've had that legal advice at least for a few years, and they've still done it, it gives you a sense, really, of how arrogant and how complacent Welsh Government actually are, and we can't afford to take our eyes off the ball in relation to that or feel comfortable that they'll take any notice of what's happened in Scotland, because they haven't so far.